Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood game master Zach Hall here. Finding the time to create content again, which is wild, but here we are. I've seen the title. This is going to be my first look at the brand new rulebook from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It is called Dark Archive. Seen some reading on it before it released. I've been trying to keep away from seeing any previews. Obviously have watched a couple other content creator previews of it. Obviously Rule Lord and NoNat. Obviously go check out their videos too for maybe different perspective. And those guys obviously know the system way better than I do, have been running the game longer than I have. This is still my kind of, I'm still learning the system, the ins and outs. I've run a handful of sessions, but this is still really kind of me transitioning from 5th edition to Pathfinder 2nd edition. I'm excited. Dark Archive supposed to be a lot of from obviously darker side of magic, a lot of undead, but we do have two brand new classes, which is mainly what I'm going to be looking at today. We've got the Psychic class and the Thaumaturge class. These two classes take up the first 50 or so pages of the book. The next 150 is all just extra stuff. So we've got cryptids, we've got, it looks like secret society, what would you call them? Like modular rule sets, deviant abilities. That looks gross. We're going to look at that. Mirrors and imposters, door into the echoing pale. That sounds terrifying. A whole section on cults, another section on curses and pacts, and a temporal anomalies and mindscapes. Absolutely wild stuff coming out. Let's go ahead and fire up the PDF. The case or the cover looks really cool. I like this kind of tome book-ish stuff. I like the kind of conceit that we're looking at a book that is kind of created in world, or at least has a bit. You can see the Thaumaturge epic, or what are they, legend, what do they call their like kind of like stand-in, it's like epic or something like that. Thaumaturge right here, the Psychic right here. Thaumaturge I'm less excited about. The Psychic I'm definitely interested in kind of checking out and seeing what the Psychic can do. So I was just reading through the table of contents, but special shout out to the three authors, James Case, Mikhail Raccoon, and Mark Sefter. And then obviously shout out to everybody else, the designers, the lead editors, Avi and Tessa, Wayne Reynolds, cover artists, looks like a dozen or so interior artists did great. And then your normal guys like James Jacobs, Jason Bullman, Eric Mona. So, all right, let's check it out. We're going to just jump in. I mean, the art is just, it's always really good. Future and fellow archivists. Dark Archive is no more, except for me. When the Pathfinder Society announced that our faction was to be dissolved, absorbed into its other departments, I grabbed the files I could and left before they could stop me. These pages are all that remain of our faction's records, and I'm all that remains of our membership. Okay, so the Dark Archive, I'm going to the Pathfinder wiki. Obviously, as a new person to Galarian and its history, I don't know a lot of the lore. So yeah, the Dark Archive faction was faction inside of Pathfinder Society. KHW, trying to see if there's, I don't see a listing of like who KHW is. Well, let me go to the just Pathfinder Society spot. Notable members, faction leaders. It's not Zarta Dralnin, apparently. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who KHW is. If you know, obviously drop it in the comments, let me know. But so the Dark Archive was represented or led by Zarta Dralnin, who was a former Chelix faction leader. Interesting. Okay. So, despite being estranged from Chellick's faction, still values order and law. These are worthy end goals in their own right, and also powerful mantras in maintaining a positive working relationship. Cool. Okay. So, but still, obviously, like working with things that probably most people would, even like high-powered, especially high-powered people, but highly magical people are not going to necessarily want everybody to have, which is apparently why they dissolved the Dark Eye faction. Imagining that might be part of maybe the final storylines from Pathfinder 1, or maybe that's some lore that happened, they established in between editions. That's kind of like a change. I've not done any of the Pathfinder Society stuff. I do not have a local Pathfinder Society game to me. I think there might actually be one that is kind of within driving distance, but doesn't happen that frequently. I'm contemplating maybe trying it out and seeing how it is. But so the most common description of the Dark Hive is that we investigate the paranormal, and that's true, but it's a description by negation. If we turn our gaze to the paranormal, first we must ask what is normal. Pathfinder's mandate of our faction's dissolution saddens me not on principle but on timing. The Dark Archive exists to explain the unexplained. My fellow archivists and I scoured Galarian for testimony, evidence, and rumors, if anything that defiled reason. So the Dark Archive was basically like the librarians, right? I mean, obviously the world of, and I guess the author is kind of talking about that, when the normal in Galarian is much different than the normal in our world. So the paranormal is even weirder in game, but that's still really, really cool. I like that. And I bet so an adventure did start coming out called Bloodlords that I have not looked at. This seems like if the Dark Archive has anything to do with Bloodlords, that seems really, really cool. I might have to look into like the first book of Bloodlords and see what's going on with that. Ooh, man. So Thaumaturge rocking maybe some kind of hand weapon. Well, this is casting implement, and then a pickaxe. And this is some weird cryptid paranormal type shit. Oof. Alrighty. So, psychic. Guided by personal combination of their subconscious and conscious mind, psychic calls forth occult magic with but a thought. Psychic focuses more on the moment than on daily spell slots, wielding unique, versatile cantrips and unleashing their mind to use strange and powerful abilities. Kind of love that as a concept. Cantrips, especially in Pathfinder 2e, are awesome. They scale a lot better in Pathfinder than they do in 5th edition. And I love the idea of a more cantrip focus, instantaneous type caster. I would imagine that psychics also don't have any kind of, what do you call them? Like you don't need materials, probably don't even need to speak anything. It's just, it happens. Maybe some body movement. So I'm going to call them epics, but I have a feeling I'm doing it wrong. I wish I could see see the term for them. But so we have Thalion, an impulsive artist from Rahadum, where religion's forbidden, an empath even as a young elf, emotions awaken latent psychic magic, and now he wanders, each feeling or experience a new shade of color on his mental canvas. Very cool. So the Thaumaturge has seen every monster and knows every secret, supplementing their skill at arms and ability to strike a monster's weakness with myriad supernatural trinkets and mystic limitations. They can fill a wide range of roles. The Thaumaturge is a versatile agent who can contribute to any team facing the unknown. Yeah, like, when I think Thaumaturge, the monster knowledge, like, the monster hunter who knows everything about them wasn't my first thought about it. Like, I was like, okay, a Thaumaturge is, yes, like, the physical connection between one thing and the other. I think the monster knowledge thing was just new to me and kind of threw me off. Also that they seem to be kind of a half caster, still like a melee, someone in melee. Mios was once a simple coach driver in Ustalov. When they were bitten by a werewolf, Mios thought their fate was sealed. After trying every superstition they knew, they somehow remained human on the next full moon. They resolved in there to protect innocence from the creatures looking in the dark, lantern in hand. I could see someone if you've watched any of my videos before, you know kind of my favorite fantasy series is the Dresden Files, urban fantasy from the author Jim Butcher. Its main character, Harry Dresden, definitely at the beginning of the series, early before he accumulated too much power, was very much a thaumaturgist. Did a lot of thaumaturgy, almost what he specialized in. Does less so past book 7 or 8 or so, but fits that kind of vibe for sure. Yeah, let's just dive in to the psychic. The mind can perceive truths hidden to fine-tune instruments, house more secrets than any tome, and move objects and hearts more deftly than any lever. By delving into both the conscious and subconscious aspects of your inner self, you have awoken to the might of psychic magic, allowing you to cast spells not through incantations or gestures, but by the power of your will alone. While the thin line between your mind and reality means that a single errant thought could have unintended consequences for yourself and your companions, you know that anything is possible if you can imagine it. So right off the bat, even just the flavor texts makes me think that there's going to be some kind of maybe flat check the psychic has to pass in order to do certain things. Maybe there's a new trait on an ability or an action granted by feats that require you to pass some kind of flat DC check to see if you can do it, or it's going to introduce some kind of like critical failure mechanic that, in addition to any additional critical failure effects, a psychic has some gnarly side effects or negative effects if things go poorly. Key ability is intelligence or charisma. So you get to choose a subclass essentially. And that kind of will shape which ability you want, which I like having the option. 6 hit points, so you're definitely like a light armor user. Untrained in all armor, so you are an unarmored magic user. During combat encounters, rely on the collection of psychic cantrips as a mainstay, choosing where and when to amplify them for magic effects. So amplifying cantrips, super cool. You weave your more conventional spells into the fray where more complex is needed, unleashing your mind's full potential in a blaze of power when the time is right. So I'd be interested to see if they get the same amount of like spell slots and level of spells as other full casters. So you have you still cast spells normally and you're just interweaving your kind of psychic cantrips, or if you have a reduced amount of spells available to you to cast. You navigate situations guided by the source of your subconscious power. We'll see that in a minute. If your powers spring from your personality, you might maneuver with empathy and sociability. If it's more cerebral, you might provide a steady logical front. So there's 2 options for a subconscious mind. You're either a big empath or a logic cerebral type person, which makes sense. I would default to like the logical psychic, especially since you already have some charisma based spellcasters elsewhere that you probably have already kind of achieved a character idea from, bard or sorcerer. So having another intelligence-based full caster is really cool if wizard doesn't really fit your in fiction for a character. While exploring, you keep your mind's eye open for the many paranormal threats that those who are less sensitive might not detect. Typically, you can either scan for magic or investigate for psychic impressions, veiled thoughts, or wandering spirits. Super cool. Downtime, you strive to learn more about the depths of your mind, seeking out new spells and phenomena to uncover. So there is ability to learn new spells. Potential. I wonder if those include like your psychic cantrips, similar to like a wizard getting spells for their spell book, or if psychic just rewrites a big part of how it casts all spells. Show a preference for learning, meditation, dreams, or other intangible manifestations. Learn new things about yourself. Think of psychic magic as much a part of you that you use, even when normal methods suffice, perhaps preferring to communicate via mental messages or levitating an object to a companion at the opposite end of a table. That's a cool little, like, some stuff I love this section of every character or every class description, just giving the players a little glimpse of like, here's how a psychic probably acts. Like a psychic, why would they pick up an apple and hand it like across the table when they could float it? Like it's such a part of them. I really like that. Like, of course, your character can act and behave in any way, which is why it says you might and not you do or you will. Others are probably awed by your mental abilities, have difficulty understanding the magic you perform with your mind comes from the same source as other conventional spellcasting, which is good to call out. Wonder if you might be a monster in disguise possessed by spirits chosen by the gods. I don't see a rarity yet, which makes me think this is a common class as opposed to the gunslinger, which was uncommon. It might just be assumed that any class outside of the player's handbook or the core rulebook, is uncommon. And of course, GM gets to decide what's available, but nothing's calling out saying this is rare enough to where you might not your GM might not allow it. Like it really does call out with the gunslinger. All right, so trained in perception, trained in fortitude and reflex with an expert in will, totally makes sense. Trained in occultism, and then 3 additional skills plus your intelligence modifier. That's pretty good. Like a psychic, especially if you're going with the logical, cerebral psychic and maxing out intelligence, you could have a good amount of skills available to you. Untrained in armor, like I said, trained in unarmor, and then occult spells. So psychic spell casting, you access the vast well of power resides within your own mind. You can cast occult spells using the cast a spell activity. You alter some of the standard spell components when casting spells from your psychic spell casting. Instead of speaking, you substitute any verbal components with a special mental component determined by your subconscious mind class feature. This represents how you exert your mind toward your intended effect. Any of those components impart the concentrate trait to the spell you're casting. So do all psychic spells, anyone that you cast like that, have the concentration trait, which is basically the trade-off. But your spells still have clear and noticeable visual and auditory manifestations as normal for a spellcaster, which is disappointing, but and as simple as that sounds, would be pretty huge. That's one that probably plays out differently at every table, right? Like I'm sure, hopefully there's a feature, a class feat somewhere that you can take at a higher level that allows you to be able to just cast certain cantrips with no like hints at it, with like no noticeable manifestations. The reason why it starts out having those at level 1, I'm assuming, is for things like counterspell and recognize a spell. You have to be able to know that a spell is being cast, and you have to be able to recognize that what the spell is in order to do those things. If a psychic was able to cast all of its spells with no visual and auditory manifestations, that would be pretty wild and would, make certain things really powerful and certain things really nerfed. So I understand it, but hopefully there's a feat later down the line in some skill tree somewhere that gets that to you. So every day you can cast 1 first level spell. You have to know the spells to cast them, and you learn them via the spell repertoire class feature. Number of spells you can cast each day is called your spell slots. As you increase in level as a psychic, then your number of spells per day changes. Some of your spells require you to attempt a spell attack roll to see how effective they are, Yep. So you can heighten spells. You must have a spell in your spell repertoire at the level you want to cast it to heighten it to that level. So with a psychic, you have to learn a first level spell. You then have to learn that spell again at a second level spell or a third level spell, like whatever level. So it's not just automatic that what's a first level spell that heightens. I don't know. I don't play spellcasters, but let's say you learn spell A at level 1, just because you get access to level 2 spell slots doesn't mean you can cast spell A at level 2. You have to use one of your class repertoire feature in order to learn spell A again at level 2. So you know spell A at level 1 and level 2. So it shrinks that spell list potentially. Some of your spells are cantrips. Don't use spell slots. You can cast a cantrip at will any number of times per day. It's automatically heightened to half your level rounded up. It's the same for everybody so far. As a psychic, you get the ability to improve some of your cantrips with special benefits in psi amps. So psi is the same thing that monks have access to. Makes sense. And then over the course of your career, your choice of conscious mind class feature will give you extra cantrips, benefits, and psi amps for cantrips, and a collection of unique psi cantrips. So we're adding in some cantrips that are unique to the psychic. Very cool. The magic of your mind manifests as psi cantrips, which you can modify by spending focus points. You use focus points. So psi cantrips are basically focus spells. Or you have... Wait. No. So you have psi cantrips, which are probably focus cantrips, which you can then modify by then using a focus point. Like other cantrips, you can cast psi cantrips as often as you like. Correct? I was right. Your psi cantrips are in addition to the cantrips you choose from the occult list. Okay, so the unique psi cantrips are focus spells for the psychic class, which makes sense. Generally, only feats can give you more psi cantrips. You can't swap out psi cantrips gained from psychic feats at a later level, unless you swap out the specific feat via retraining. At first level, you learn 3 psi cantrips determined by your choice of conscious mind. 1 is a unique cantrip, and two are common, typically from the occult spell casting tradition. So not only at level 1 do you know 3 cantrips that are just your picking cantrips from the occult spell casting list, you also know 3 additional ones that go into your focus cantrip, your psi cantrip list, which is separate. One of those 3 is unique to the subclass, like conscious mind class feature that you pick. So at level 1, you know a total of 6 cantrips. But to be fair, those cantrips in your normal spell list don't change. So those 3 that you pick just outside of your psi cantrips, unless you retrain or relearn, those are the 3 you know. And continue to be heightened normally, but those aren't the ones affected. It's your focus spells. So very focus spell heavy, probably. Spellcasting class. This looks... I'd have to look side by side to compare it to things like the wizard or sorcerer or bard or whatever. But, I mean, you get access to, your 9th and 10th level spell slots. And they don't go away, which I've seen in other classes, probably from 5e that I'm remembering now. A lot of stuff you get at level 1. That's a lot of stuff. And then you get your class feat every even level. You get a signature spell at level 3. A couple things like, here and there. Very cool. You start with a focus pool of 2 focus points. That's huge. I've not read and studied every single class, but most start at 1. So getting 2 focus points is huge. But you don't gain focus spells that cost right. So you never learn actual focus spells that cost a focus point. All of it is your cantrips, and then you use your focus points to change or amp up your focus cantrips. That tracks. Makes sense. You get amp effects. You choose which amp to use. If you choose to use any each time you cast a psi cantrip, you can, unless otherwise noted, you can only apply 1 amp to a given psi cantrip. I would imagine it's probably simple things like meta magic stuff that allows you to maybe extend the reach of a cantrip or widen it from, a 10-foot cone to a 20-foot cone or things like that. I'll be interested to see what the additional effects are. You can regain your focus points by spending 10 minutes using the refocus activity, which is cool. If you spent focus points only to amp psi cantrips or fuel psychic abilities since the last time you refocused, you regain 2 focus points when you refocus up to your maximum of 2. But if you spent focus points on focus spells or abilities other than those from the psychic class, so if you multi-classed and used a focus point for that other class or archetypes thing, you only regain 1 focus point when you refocus. So giving you a reason, basically like you get to refill up your focus pool if you're only doing it for things that the psychic is doing. I like that a lot. When one thins the barrier between their inner mind and the outer world, one can unleash true psychic power. However, the mind wasn't meant to tap its full strength for long, leading to backlash. So free action, when your turn begins and you're in an encounter and you just cast a spell on your previous turn and you aren't stupefied, you can call on the depths of your mind and let the psychic power flood through. Your psyche remains unleashed for 2 rounds or until you fall unconscious, whichever comes first. You cannot voluntarily quell your unleashed psyche. While your psyche is unleashed, the following effects occur. You are constantly surrounded by the visual manifestation of your psychic magic. When you cast a damaging spell, you gain a status bonus to its damage equal to double the spell's level. This applies only to spells that don't have a duration and that you cast using psychic spellcasting. So you can't take a 1 level dip into multi-classing into psychic to get the unleash psyche action and then go and cast other class spells. You can use actions that have the psych. You can use actions that have the psyche trait. So there's additional actions you can do while you have unleashed your psyche. So after those 2 rounds, you have to recover from the strain, and you can't use Unleash Psyche again for 2 rounds, and you're stupefied 1 for 2 rounds. Worthwhile trade-off if you think you can get the finishing blow and finish up an encounter, or you've worked with your party to create some kind of safe space for you. But stupefied 1, the stupefied condition's gnarly. I'm gonna confirm the stupefied condition. Conditions. Stupefied. Your thoughts and instincts are clouded. That's okay. So stupefied always includes a value. You take a status penalty equal to this value on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma-based checks and DCs, including will saving throws, spell attack rolls, spell DCs, and skill checks that use these ability scores. Plus, anytime you attempt to cast a spell while stupefied, the spell is disrupted unless you succeed a flat check with a DC equal to 5 plus your stupefied value. Actually, that's not nearly as bad as I thought it was. Stupefied, like, yes, it's a pretty gnarly status penalty, but you can absolutely run away, and you can still, if you decided to go that way, or you can still take cover. And honestly, like, you could still, like, especially if you were trying to take out something lower level than you, and you had the ability, like a DC 6 flat check is not rough. So, like, I don't even think you necessarily need to wait until towards the end of an encounter as like a final big blow. You can absolutely work that in. There is a trade-off, but it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was. I'm glad I looked at that. So the subconscious mind, your subconscious mind might represent the way your power comes to you naturally, or maybe a framework you use to safely access the infinite potential of your mind. Either way, your subconscious mind fundamentally shapes how you access and wield psychic magic. So choose an option or options from sources to which you have access. So leaving the door open for additional subconscious mind options from other sources. It will determine your key ability, special spellcasting components you use, and an action you can take while you have unleashed your psyche. So a single action. Oh, so there's 4 options on page 15. We're getting there, but we have emotional acceptance. You're throwing yourself headlong into your emotions is what lets you access your power. I like that a lot. That isn't my default thought for a psychic, but yeah, I dig that just from a flavor standpoint. Really cool. Gathered lore. Tutors taught you specific axioms and lessons to help you harness your mind. Precise discipline, meticulously aligning your thoughts brings your mental power into reality. Wandering reverie, your imagination fuels your magic through instinct and free association. Those are all just so cool. And I mean, I don't know how different they are, but even just from a flavor standpoint, that's going to be really cool. So whatever the subconscious source of a psychic's power, All find that a specific external manifestation of their magic comes most easily to them. This conscious outward expression adds several spells to your spell repertoire and grants you 3 psych cantrips. 2 of these cantrips are common spells, though you do gain an extra benefit with them that other spellcasters don't get. The last is unique to your conscious mind. Oh, so it's not even your unconscious mind that gives you your additional little cantrips and spells. It is your conscious mind, which is a separate decision. So your unconscious mind is like how you engage with your magic mentally, internally. What does it feel like to you? Then your conscious mind is what is that feeling and how do you engage with it? What is the most common way that it manifests itself in reality? So you have the distant grasp, manipulate physical objects with telekinesis. Infinite eye, observe the world and weaponize your knowledge. Oscillating wave, redistribute thermal energy to create blazing heat and bone-chilling cold. Silent whisper, tap into the thoughts of those around you to soothe their influence. Tangible dream, weave your imagination into creations of force and light. Unbound step, bend and traverse space with teleportation and phrasing. I'm sorry, I had very low expectations for the psychic. I didn't know what to expect. This is the coolest class. I haven't even really gotten into like the nitty-gritty mechanics of like what a turn in an encounter might look like, but I've never really identified with a spellcaster, like a full-blown spellcaster. Wizards were the closest. I never identified with sorcerers using charisma as their spellcasting ability. I understand the in-world reasons for it. I think the out-of-world reasons played more a role, and so it seems a little disconnected to me. Bards are just not my thing. I'm not that type of person. I don't get to play very often. And I'm not, if I'm being honest, I'm not the most imaginative person out there. I am trying to be more creative and imaginative. And I'm a decent improviser. I wouldn't say I tend to improvise by stealing things that I like. This, even just the flavor description to me, this is the first time I've been like, I see how this works for a character. Like I can see a character being created as you make these decisions that are crucial. And I can identify with them, which again is not how everybody plays pen and paper RPGs. I understand. I mainly run games. I'm a forever GM. So I don't have a lot of experience of creating and playing a ton of different characters. So I think I still am in the beginner phase of character building of like, I tend to play characters that are aspects of myself, and I see an aspect of myself in parts of this, like a first level that I would really enjoy playing. Let's look at the key terms before we move on to like additional higher level stuff. So amps are special thought forms that modify the properties of your psi cantrips. Those are the cantrips you get from your conscious mind choice. You can apply amp only to a psi cantrip, which is then called the amped cantrip. Applying an amp to a psi cantrip costs a focus point and is part of the action needed to cast the spell. So no additional actions necessary to amp a psi cantrip. It is just a part of what happens when you cast a spell. The singular focus required to amp a psi cantrip means that unless otherwise noted, you can apply only one amp to a given psi cantrip. And you can't apply both an amp and a meta magic ability to a cantrip at the same time. Keep you from double dipping into psychic and sorcerer, or maybe the wizard can also do meta magic stuff. If both an amp and the amped cantrip deal damage of the same type, combine their damage for the purposes of resistance and weaknesses. Cool. Feats with the amp cantrip, or feats with the amp trait, provide different amps you can apply to psi cantrips in place of their normal amps. If an amp has its own effect, its level is the same as the amped cantrip. Many amps have heightened entries similar to spells. Add the amp's heightened effects when you cast a cantrip at that level or higher. These are in addition to any heightened effects of the cantrip, though some adjust the cantrip's normal heightened entry. typically in the case of damage increases. So like if maybe there's an amp that's like heightened, instead of 1 additional D8, roll 2 D8s, where it kind of, they choose to modify instead of just adding on top, which probably makes for easier reading. Mind Shift. An action with this trait can always be altered to use the raw power of your mind. When you take this action, you can choose to replace any damage it deals with mental damage. Give it the mental trait, and replace any save it requires with a will save. The action loses any traits matching damage types it no longer deals. That's wild. I wonder how much of that is around, because that is very, very cool. And then Psyche. Your Psyche must be unleashed to use abilities that have the Psyche trait, and they end automatically when your Unleashed Psyche subsides. Yep. So you get your Psychic class feats at 2nd level and every even numbered level like normal. A skill feat at the same time. General feats at 3rd level and every 4 levels after. So at 3rd level, you gain a signature spell. You've learned to cast some of your spells more flexibly. For each spell level you have access to, choose one spell of that level to be a signature spell. You don't need to learn heightened version of signature spells separately. Instead, you can heighten those spells freely. If you've learned a signature spell at a higher level than its minimum, you can also cast all its lower level versions without learning those separately. Cool. So I've seen that in other classes, pulled it over here. I like it. Picasso. Skill increases, 3rd level number 2. Ability boosts, 5th. Ancestry feats. Clarity of focus at 5th. Your deepening connection to your mind grants you more power to fuel your psyamps. Increase the number of your focus points in your focus pool by 1. Sorry, I skipped ahead. This ability doesn't change the number of focus points you regain when you refocus as normal. This ability can't increase the size of your focus point pool above 3 points. So, assuming you haven't done any archetypes or multi-classing shenanigans, at 5th level, your focus pool equals 3. Because you start with 2, you get an additional 1 at 5th level. But when you refocus, you still only get 2 focus points back every time you refocus. It doesn't adjust that 2 to 3, even if you only casted, even if you only used focus points for psi cantrip stuff. Your reflex saves move to expert at 5th. 7th, you become an expert in your spell stuff. 9th level fortitude saves expert. Perception doesn't get to expert until 11th. I wonder if there's a feat that changes that or increases your perception, especially if you chose like a conscious mind that you're dipping into other people's minds. I could see a psychic maybe having access to a spell or ability that tells you, like pings you how many people or what types of creatures are in a certain area around you, just based on even if you can't see them. Will save increases to master. Weapon expertise, yeah, you're not going to be doing much there. Personal barrier at 13th level. Subtle telekinetic fields dampen and deflect incoming blows. Oh, it's just your unarmored defense. I thought this was going to be something different. I started reading it like it was something cool. It's just your unarmored defense going up. Fortress of Will is your will saves, legendary will saves. Cool. So Infinite Mind at 19th is you common 10th level occult spells, and you gain a single 10th level spell slot you can use to cast one of those 2 spells using psychic spellcasting. Correct. Yep. Legendary spells at night. Cool. All right, so let's look at the subconscious mind choices. They all have a key ability and a psyche action that you can do after you've unleashed your psyche. So emotional acceptance, the mind's truths come not in learned words or mathematical formulas, but in deeper feelings and sensations. Emotions unlock the door to your power. You might consider your heart the source of your strength, or you might find that the infinite complexity felt in a moment expresses your power more efficiently than any string of magical or mystic words ever could. Your thought components are emotions. You might summon the sense of freedom to buoy you through the air, or let fear grip your heart even as you plant it in another's mind. Emotion components tend to impart abstract or visual effects to your visual and auditory spell manifestations, as well as more intangible flashes of emotion, such as swirls of joyous color or a sense of growing melancholy. Your key ability score is charisma. you can use the restore the mind action. Your unleashed psyche gives you closer connections to the emotions of your allies, letting you project reassurance and strength that replenishes their mind and body, which is one of the 2 benefits. You get your allies get a +1 status bonus to saving throws against mental effects, or regains hit points equal to 2 plus double your level. Interesting. That's cool. I that flavor text is a lot for what's going to end up being on the player to kind of describe, and on the GM maybe if you're at a table where the GM is kind of responsible for describing the visual flavor of spellcasting. But I like it. Many psychics are self-taught, frantically improvising how to best control their abilities before their power overwhelms them. Not you. Tutored by a mentor or classically trained at a facility for psychic development, you've learned techniques and teachings for best harnessing the mind, cataloging each expression of psychic power with a specific teaching anecdote or phrase. Your thought components are mantras you associate with a given spell, which you mentally repeat as you cast. You might silently utter a teaching of resilience as you spin force into a barrier, or hear the first 3 notes of a traveling song as you slip through space. Mantra components often produce runes or symbols from your learnings that are unique to each spell you cast. The Gathered Lore has a very wizardy feel to it, like you've learned something, you are using words or phrase even unvoiced mentally, but things are happening similar to how you would cast a standard spell. Runes appearing in the air, that's all pretty cool. So that's an intelligence subconscious mind. You use the recall teachings action. The heightened power of your psyche lets you recall every lesson you've ever learned. You search your mind for the right teaching, which at first seems cryptic, but comes into clarity when it's most relevant. At the start of your next turn, you count as having prepared to aid all allies within 30 feet of you. If you use the aid reaction to help one of them during this time, you can roll an occultism check to aid them. Interesting. So basically a boost to aid is interesting. The first 2 have been like aiding your allies and not necessarily doing something for you. I mean, doing something for you as you know what I'm saying. It's not like, I'm assuming the psyamps are going to be a little more focused on what happens, like what you do. Seems like the psyche are introducing a level of support to make sure that it's a little more well-rounded of a class, and gives you things like gives a psychic something that like a wizard isn't just going to be able to do. Some of these effects are not like easily replicable by a spell. Definitely not at level 1. Precise discipline. This is the other intelligence-based one. Determine intended outcome. Align thoughts. Identify and resolve distractions. Manifest. Intentional focused is the key to unleashing your abilities, whether that's because your power naturally tends to precise, discrete effects, or because you've adopted strict discipline to ensure your mind can change the world only when you intend it to. I like that a lot. You guys might be able to tell which flavor I've identified with. Your thought components are calculations you make to determine the forces you need to call upon. Perhaps you mentally weigh the mass of an object against the force of gravity to levitate it, or you might determine exactly how much energy is needed for an object to combust. Calculation components tend to impart ordered visual and auditory effects to your spell manifestations, such as regular tessellations of light, mathematical spirals, or harmonic tones. Your actions calculate threats. Your subconscious automatically calculates vectors and forces when your mind is unleashed, showing you the likely path of incoming attacks to avoid. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to AC and reflex saves until the beginning of your next turn. Yeah, this is the psychic I would build. 100%. Yeah. I feel like me just saying that you've learned some deep thing about me that I do not vocalize, because how do you vocalize that? But if you ever identified with Data from Next Generation or Sherlock Holmes, but you've been interested in figuring out and playing a spellcaster, the precise psychic is for you. Wandering Reverie. This is the last one. It's a charisma thing. Subconscious is by definition buried below the surface. Thus, only by stripping away the clamor and interference of everyday thought can you bring this more fundamental part of your mind to bear. Whether through sleep, self-hypnosis, or special exercises to empty your mind, you've found a way to access a deeper, more chaotic state of free association that better channels your psychic power. Your thought components come from your imagination, images and sensations your mind freely associates. You might have a passing daydream of small creatures bringing you an object as you telekinetically attract it to you, or you may blink to find you've transported to your desired location. Spell manifestations from imagination components have surreal or indistinct qualities, and the exact details fade quickly from observer's memory as sensations from a dream. That's pretty cool. I see that's a very Feywild-y psychic stuff. I don't even know what the Feywild is necessarily like in Galarian and Pathfinder stuff, but coming from a 5e background, I could absolutely see a elf or any of the fey type creatures that they've added as race options in 5e. A wandering psychic would be a very cool, really plays into that a lot. Your flights of imagination spill into the real world, causing you to become indistinct, hazy, or cloaked in figments. You become concealed until the start of your next turn, but this concealment can't be used to hide, as normal for concealing effects that leave your location obvious. So the first two subconscious minds were support focused, where precise discipline and wandering reverie are more, what have you done for me lately kind of effect. Subconscious, or now the conscious mind stuff, so this is separate. It doesn't depend, it's not determined by your unconscious mind choice. This is what gives you those granted spells, the cantrips, and your unique psi cantrip. Distant grasp. Motion characterizes the physical. A boulder falls, characters move, the world turns. You believe the truest form of mind over matter is therefore to move things as well, wielding telekinesis as an arm that can grasp the furthest and finest of objects. So you get access to kinetic ram at first level, telekinetic maneuver at second, levitate at third, fly at fourth, telekinetic haul at fifth, poltergeist's fury, which is new, telekinetic bombardment, which is new, falling sky, which is new, and implosion as your 9th level spell. Kinetic ram is also new. So 4 out of 9 brand new spells for the distant grasp psychic. So you get Mage Hand and Telekinetic Projectile as your standard cantrips. Could have told you. Then unique psi cantrips. Apparently, the way they gotcha. So at first level, you have a surface. Your unique psi cantrip is at surface level. At 6th level, it progresses to deeper. 10th level, deepest. So Telekinetic Rend, Vector Screen, and Dancing Blade are the unique cantrip, and it looks like those are new cantrips. It's not, in my mind, I imagined those being kind of leveled up throughout, but it seems like you get a new one as you level up, access to all 3 at 10th. Your Mage Hand can carry up to 1 bulk instead of just light, and its maximum bulk is 2 at 3rd level or higher, heightened to 3rd level or higher. So you have to be level 6. Level 14, it becomes max bulk is 3. It also gains a following amp. You create a multitude of telekinetic hands that grip onto a creature, move it about. You can target a creature of medium size or smaller with the amped spell instead of an object. And you can attempt to shove the target in a direction of your choice, rolling a spell attack roll against its fortitude DC instead of an athletics check. Creature takes a minus 10 circumstance bonus to its speeds until the spell ends. Starting the round after you cast the spell, the first time each round you sustain the spell, you can attempt to shove the creature again. Then at 4th level, if the cantrip is heightened to 4th level, which is your level 8, you can attempt to disarm the creature instead of attempting to shove it. And if you knock an item out of its creature's grasp, this way the Mage Hand immediately grabs it. Any effect on the Mage Hand on the creature ends like it's the spell reduction, and the spell just now simply carries the item just like you had picked it up with an unamped Mage Hand. That was pretty wild. Oh, and telekinetic projectile also changes. So it can its range is increased to 60 feet, you can amp it up to fling objects with even more force. On a success, you push the target 5 feet away from you. On a critical success, 10 feet away, in addition to dealing double damage. And then amp heightened. For each additional level that telekinetic projectile is heightened, it does 2d6 damage instead of 1d6. They're really giving you a lot of flexibility and really making sure that you can continue to use these cantrips well into a campaign, even into high level, which is super cool. You're not going to feel like only being able to cast like 2 5th level spells or whatever. That's not going to feel as bad when your telekinetic projectile is doing what, 4d6 damage, can hit up to 60 feet away and potentially push targets. Super cool. So then your unique cantrip, telekinetic rend, psychic evocation, 2 action, 60-foot range, area 2, non-overlapping, 5-foot burst. Your mind creates a violent access of motion in a nearby space. You deal your choice of 1d6 bludgeoning or slashing damage to all creatures in the area with a basic fortitude save. Creature large enough to be in more than one of the bursts takes damage only once. Oh, bummer. Then every second level that it's heightened, it increases by 1d6 power. You can amp it up to do both bludgeoning and slashing damage. And if a creature critically fails, it's stunned 1. Amp heightened. So whenever it's heightened and then amped, both types of damage increase by 1d6. And you add a 3rd non-overlapping 5-foot burst. That's really cool. I dig it a lot. Vector screen, 2 action, 60-foot range, area 1, 5-foot square. It lasts until the start of your next turn. You set up a transparent, rippling screen of telekinetic energy that seizes small and fast-moving projectiles. Creatures can pass through the screen, but ammunition from physical ranged attacks, such as arrows, bolts, sling bullets, and other objects of similar size, are automatically trapped in the screen, clattering to the ground once the spell ends. Attacks with bigger ranged weapons, such as javelins, take a -2 penalty to the attack rolls if the path passed through the screen. Massive ranged weapons and spell effects that don't create physical objects pass through the screen with no penalty. Heightened 5th, 10 feet wide, heightened at 6, it's 10 feet wide, and can even interfere with massless attacks like magical blast or gouts of flame. Amped up, it lasts longer, and you can detonate it for an explosive counterattack. The duration becomes a minute. You can dismiss a spell. If there are any projectiles trapped in the screen, you can cast telekinetic projectile to fire them at one creature as part of dismissing the spell. Measure the range for the telekinetic projectile from wherever the vector screen was instead of from you. Oh, the flavor is immaculate. I love it so much. Oh, that's so freaking cool. Of course I should be able to just summon a telekinetic screen somewhere in front of me, and bullets and arrows can't pass through it. Of course. So you get access to that at 6th level. 10th level, you get access to Dancing Blade. Targets one creature, 2 actions to cast. You can sustain it for up to a minute. Telekinetically animate a weapon that's unattended or on your person. Brandishes itself at a foe of your choice as if wielded by an invisible duelist. When you first cast the spell, this weapon automatically flies to the target and strikes. So as part of that 2 action to cast, it also makes a strike at the target. It moves along with its target, always remaining within reach, and every time you sustain the spell, the weapon either changes partners or strikes. The weapon's attacks use and contribute to your multiple attack penalty. Some healthy balancing, but honestly, if you're not hitting things with people, like you probably aren't, it really won't come into play that much. You can change the target to a different creature within 30 feet as part of its like singular action when you sustain it. Or you can strike on a hit. It does 2d6 plus your spellcasting modifier with the type determined by the weapon. Heightened every second level. It goes from 2d6 to 3d6, or it increases by 1d6. You can amp it to increase in strength, and the weapon die changes from d6s to d10s. And then it can stay, I guess it stays it stays amped as long as you continue to sustain it. Rather than attacking, the weapon grants a +2 circumstance bonus to AC against melee attacks. Oh, so you can change its. That's why they framed it as change partners instead of change targets, because it can be supportive. So you can use it to kill some, like strike at an enemy, and then use its action the next turn to change, like move to one of your companions. And then the turn after that, you can guard, or you can push using it. You can use your spell attack roll instead of an athletics check to determine the results of the push. Man, this is going to take a little while to get into. I'm hitting an hour. This video, you probably know this already because I've probably changed the title. This is just going to be the psychic. I don't have the time to do the thaumaturge also. We'll look at that another time. Infinite Eye, true strength of the mind lies in the knowledge it contains, with each new observation contributing to the totality of experiences. To grow your experiences, and with them your power, you devote yourself to observing as much as possible, casting your senses through space and time with clairvoyance and precognition. So you get True Strike, Augury, Organ Sight, which is from Secrets of Magic, Clairvoyance, Prying Eye, True Seeing, True Target, Unrelenting Observation, and Foresight. You then get Detect Magic and Guidance as your standard psi cantrips. Then get Glimpse Weakness, Omnidirectional Scan, and Foresee the Path. I bet Omnidirectional Scan is that maybe it's that ability I was talking about earlier about being able to know who's there even if you can't visibly see them. So you obviously can detect magic. Your Pulse of Detection Magic helps you gain a sense of nearby magic strength witnesses. You can detect the presence of magic on an enemy or hazard. Or when you do, you gain a +1 status bonus to saves against magic originating from that enemy or hazard for 3 rounds. So basically, not when you detect it, you can use that knowledge to defend yourself against it, which is awesome. If you find magic from multiple sources with a single casting, you get the bonus against all of them. Woo! And then that status bonus can go up to a +2 circumstance bonus when you hit level 14. So guidance, you have eyes everywhere, allowing you to guide people from a great distance. The range of guidance increases to 120 feet. You can then amp it up. Amped guidance doesn't cause a creature to become temporarily immune to guidance, and a creature can be targeted by amped guidance even if it is temporarily immune to normal guidance. When you cast an amped guidance spell as a reaction, triggered when your ally fails or critically fails an action roll, an attack roll, perception check, saving throw, or skill check, and the bonus from guidance would change the failure to a success or the critical failure to a normal failure. The bonus from guidance applies retroactively to their check. What? Are you kidding me? So you see the future. As a GM, if I had a player that was playing an Infinite Eye Psychic and they use this amped guidance as a reaction, you have to basically rewrite history. It's like, that's what would have happened if character A here hadn't, or what I just described is what character A saw in their mind's eye. They then, in an effort to change that possible reality from happening, as a reaction, they cast a psychic amped guidance, and whatever just happened didn't happen, and this happened instead. That is so cool. Wow. I really like that a lot. Okay, I gotta keep moving on. My mind just kind of blown. I love it so much. The storytelling from that one spell is crazy. Glimpse Weakness. I'm sorry, I haven't moved past. Can you imagine a huge boss fight like at the end of a AP book, or just whenever, like this huge story moment that like a huge crucial thing is trying to happen, and one of your party members rolls and it fails. It doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, or the way your party needed it to go. And so the Infinite Eye Psychic just goes, I'm going to use my reaction to cast Guidance. And that +1 makes it from a failure to a success. And imagine the table vibes. Imagine the reaction of your party when that +1 changes, retroactively changes that thing. You all got so bummed out and sad when that thing happened or didn't happen. And then the psychic comes in and was like, actually, and changes reality. So freaking cool. All right, got to move on. Glimpse weakness, single action, 60 foot, one target, lasts 1 minute. You glimpse a loose scale, a seam in a foe's armor, or a similar weakness, aiding your allies in landing a precise hit. The first ally that hits the target with a successful strike deals an additional precision damage equal to 1 plus the spell's level, and then the spell ends. You can amp it to be 1d4 plus 1. At some point, or I guess I'm trying to figure out the math of when 1 plus the spell's level. Is 1d4 plus 1 always going to be better than 1 plus spell's level? I guess so. Because let's say at level 1, it would do 2 damage. 1 plus the spell level 1. If you amped it, it could still be 2. Because you could roll a 1 on the d4. But you at least have the possibility of it going all the way to 5. Because then by the time you hit, and then it amps heightened cantrip level 3, which you get at level 6. So if you didn't amp it, it would do 7 damage. 1 plus, no, because the cantrip spell level it would be 3. So it would only do 4. 1 plus 3 for 4. And that's when the additional, so it goes from 1d4 plus 1, where you'd have to hit a 4 to do more damage when you amped it. That's when it changes to an additional, so to 2d4. The math is tight. You just still got to do the math. At level 6, you get access to the 3rd level cantrip omnidirectional scan. It is another 1 action verbal 30-foot emanation, targets 1 ally and 1 enemy, lasts until the start of your next turn. You quickly view your surroundings from a variety of angles, your senses constructing an overall mental picture. You can choose to seek the entire emanation of the spell. Regardless of whether you seek, target 1 ally and 1 enemy in the area. If a target is concealed or hidden from you, you automatically succeed at the flat check to target it with a spell. You prepare to aid the target ally on an attack roll against the target enemy. If you take this aid reaction, you use your spell attack modifier proficiency rank on your check to aid. If you critically fail the roll to aid, you gain a failure instead. When you amp it, your scans are so minute you can project strengths and weaknesses onto the foe. You learn which of the target enemy saving throws is highest and which is lowest, and you and all your allies within 30 feet gain a +1 circumstance bonus to attacks and damage against the creature. And then if you use the aid reaction you prepared for, the bonus increases to +2. On a critical success is +3 or +4 if you have a legendary proficiency in spell attack rolls. That's super cool too. Not exactly what I would have foreseen, but basically scanning an enemy and setting up another of your allies to be able to like hit the enemy with something is pretty cool. Pursue the path, you get a level 10. Another 1 action verbal, 60-foot range, targets an ally and an enemy again, sustained up to a minute. You see just a split second into the future and glean how an enemy will move, making it easier for your allies to strike it mid-action. Make a perception check against the target enemy's will DC or deception DC, whichever is higher. The GM may judge a different DC as more appropriate if it's higher, for instance using the warfare lore DC of a military captain. Oh, interesting. Love they call that out. Make it clear for the GMs. Thank you, Paizo. That way the GM doesn't seem like the bad guy when they decide to do something different that makes sense but wasn't spelled out on paper. Critical success. Target ally gains a reaction that lets it make a melee strike against the target enemy, triggered if the enemy leaves a square within the ally's reach. So basically you can give your allies attacks of opportunity if they didn't have it. If they already have that type of ability, like attack of opportunity, they can forego the actual temporary reaction and instead gain a +2 status on the actions it could already take as a reaction. Sick. Just like a critical success, but the status is a +1 if they forego the reaction. So if that character didn't have attack of opportunity or something like it already, success and critical success is the same. Failure, no effect. No critical failure effect. Amp, the spell has the same result on a failure as on a success. Still no effect on a critical failure. So you can this spell's gonna work if you amp it. And all it costs is a focus point to amp it. Gosh, I got to go through this faster. It's taken me an hour and 15 minutes to go through 20 pages. Oscillating wave, I'm going to try to do these faster, but these are so cool. Heart of all things is energy. So this is your like thermodynamics guy. Shift energy, concentrating into a single point of explosive end or freezing objects by plundering it away. Endless oscillation of temperature. Burning hands, heat metal from the APG, fireball, fire shield, cone of cold, flame vortex from Secret of Magic, fiery body, polar ray, meteor swarm. You then get the produce flame and ray of frost cantrips that have special effects. You then get the unique psi cantrips, thermal stasis, entropic wheel, and redistribute potential. This is my shit. Give me what was it called? Give me the precise discipline oscillating wave psychic immediately. Conservation of energy. Energy can be created or destroyed, only transferred or changed because I'm a smart person. The fact that conservation of energy is a known thing, I imagine psychics are the only one to know about conservation of energy. I think a level 1 psychic and a level 1 oscillating wave psychic could walk into any higher education school in Galarian and give a lecture on the conservation of energy and absolutely blow the ever-loving mind out of like an archmage or whatever. The first time in an encounter that you cast a granted spell from your conscious mind or a psi cantrip, decide whether you're adding energy or removing it. Once you add energy, you must remove energy the next time you cast one of these spells. When you refocus, you restore yourself to a neutral state, allowing you to once again freely choose whether you're adding or removing energy on your next spell. I said I was going to go fast. I lied. That is a bonkers mechanic that absolutely makes sense and now totally clicks with the oscillating wave. At first I was like, it kind of seems like they just didn't have enough fire spells. They wanted to just make a fire burning evoker, but they didn't have enough fire spells, so they had to fill in the gaps with some ice frost ones. No. They're sticking to the physics. You can't just cast multiple fire flame trait spells because that's too much energy. You're not creating energy, you're redistributing it. So if you cast a fire trait, you then have to adding energy. The ability gains the fire trait. Any damage it deals is fire damage, and any resistance it grants is to cold damage. It loses any traits matching damage. Whoa, okay, I was wrong. Scratch the last 30 seconds. Then removing energy. The ability gains the cold trait. Any damage it does is cold damage, and any resistance it grants is to fire damage. It loses any traits matching damage types and no longer deals. Fiery body grants ray of frost instead of produce flame when cast this way. I don't know what fiery body is. That must come in a second. Mind shift. When you use an action that has the mind shift trait, you can choose to add or remove energy to it instead of making it mental. Alter it as normal for adding or removing energy and change any save it requires. So the mind shift stuff, if you remember from earlier, was if it has the mind shift trait, you can make it do mental damage and go against their will DC instead of any of its normal stuff. With oscillating wave psychics, you can use that same ability but mind shift it to be fire by adding energy or cold by removing energy and make it a reflex save instead. I don't know where this fiery body comes from. It must be maybe a thing granted as a feat, but you get ray of frost and produce flame when cast. So I was wrong in that it forces you to make decisions and do things in order. It just basically changes things out. So let's say turn 1 you moved and ended up casting produce flame as a cantrip. Then the next turn you have the action economy to cast burning hands, but you just did an adding energy spell, so the next one is removing energy. So instead of burning hands having the fire trait and doing fire damage, It instead is basically chilly hands and has the cold trait and does cold damage instead of the fire. Like, it literally changes the spell. So you're this oscillating between fire and ice. So fucking cool. Produce flame. You can drastically increase the heat against adjacent targets. When you use produce flame as a melee attack, increase the damage from the initial damage, not persistent, but the initial damage from D4 to D6s. It also gains the following ant. You can project pure heat that causes the target to combust. The initial damage changes to D10 fire damage, not adding your ability modifier, +1 fire splash damage. When using amped produce flame as a melee attack, change it from D10 to D12. You're not harmed by splash damage from amped. So you could go from just a melee attack doing D4 by becoming an oscillating wave psychic and spending 1 focus point. You can just do from a D4 melee to a D12 melee with splash damage that you are not harmed by. Guys, the next video is me making my oscillating wave precision psychic. Has to be. Do you play Pathfinder? Are you an actual play host or producer? Would you like to showcase some dark archive content soon? Contact me to play a psychic, because I am in. Ray of Frost, you're Ray of Frost. 180 foot range on Ray of Frost. It also, when you amp it, you drain thermal energy at a distance, using what you plunder to replenish yourself. The ray deals 1d10 cold damage, and you gain temporary hit points equal to half the damage the target takes after applying resistances and the like. You then lose any remaining temporary hit points after 1 minute. Oh, God, it's so cool. We haven't even gotten to the unique cantrip yet. Let's do it. Thermal stasis, 1 action, verbal, 60-foot range, targets a creature to last until the start of your next turn. The same abilities that you raise or lower thermal energy also lets you keep it at a safe medium. The target gains resistance 2 against fire damage and resistance 2 against cold damage, heightened for every level. Each resistance increases by 2. You can amp it to where the duration will last 1 minute. Super, super, super cool. You could use thermal stasis to protect someone right next to you and then produce flame melee, or reduce flame just a creature right next to them to protect them from splash damage. All right, Entropic Wheel, 3rd level cantrip, so you get access to it at 6th level. It is a reaction verbal, with the trigger being you deal cold or fire damage to an enemy, which is going to be every goddamn turn. Duration 1 minute. You stockpile thermal energy in a magical wheel-like construct that lets you burn opponents with cold or freeze. That burns your opponents with cold or freeze their bodies with heat. When you cast the spell, the wheel has 1 mote of thermal energy, and when you use a cold or fire effect or deal cold or fire damage, the wheel spins, siphoning off a bit of energy and gaining another mote. The wheel can't gain motes more than once on a given turn, and the maximum number of motes is equal to Entropic Wheel's level. When you cast a spell that deals fire damage, the target also takes cold damage, equal to the number of motes in the Entropic Wheel. When you cast a spell that deals cold damage, the target also takes fire damage, equal to the number of motes in the Entropic Wheel. This applies only to the initial damage of the spell, not to any persistent damage or ongoing effects. You can amp it so that the wheel gains 2 motes instead of 1 when you cast a spell, and each time the wheel gains another mote. That's nutty. That adds a whole other layer of potentiality. Yeah, that's pretty buck wild, but I love it. Just a little bit of extra damage. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit. That's really cool. Redistribute potential, 2 actions, somatic, verbal, 60-foot range, area 2 adjacent 5-foot squares. It's a basic fortitude saving throw. Energy attempts to balance out, but with your magic, you can shunt all the energy in one area to another. Creatures in either area take 4d4 damage with a basic fortitude save. Choose one of the squares to steal heat, dealing cold damage, and the other to concentrate the stolen heat, dealing fire damage. Yeah! So cool. A creature that fails its save also becomes Clumsy 1 from Numbness or Enfeebled 1 from Heat Stroke, depending on which area it was. These conditions last until the start of your next turn. If a creature is large enough to be in both squares, you choose only one of the areas for it to attempt its save against. It's unaffected by the other areas. Increase damage by 1d4 every time it's heightened. Amp, you can affect the flow of energy on a much grander scale. Instead of 2 5-foot squares to create 2 10-foot bursts. They must still be adjacent to one another and can overlap. A creature in both areas can still only be affected by one of your choice. Spell's damage increases to 2d6, and it's increased by 2d6 every time it is heightened. Wild. Okay. Silent Whisper. Each mind murmurs constantly, and the static from those nearby reverberates in your head like wind through leaves. What better focus for your magic than the very thoughts of those around you? Your versatile telepathic abilities let you soothe and communicate with your allies or control your enemies. You get Mind Link, Touch of Idiocy, Heroism, Telepathy, Synaptic Pulse, Sending, Visions of Danger, Uncontrollable Dance, Telepathic Demand. You then get access to the cantrips Daze and Message. You get, and then a unique cantrips, Forbidden Thought, Shatter Mind, and Contagious Idea. Bonkers, you can daze at an increased range of 120. You can also amp it to where the damage changes to a D10, and it gets a weakness 1 to mental damage, -1 status penalty to will saves. That gets changed up to a weakness 3 instead of 1. Very cool. Message. Your message is not so easily bound by obstacles. The spell can travel up to 120 feet to reach the target. Bending around walls and objects means you don't need a straight line of effect or line of sight to cast message, as long as you know the target's space and that there is an unblocked path of 120 feet or less and going to reach them. So not as the crow flies 120 feet, but the path the spell would take needs to be 120 feet or less. You can then amp it. That allows you, the target of your message can immediately spin its reaction to step or stride. Very cool, very powerful combo move, I think, if you are coordinating it well. You can then, at heightened, you can shove, strike, or trip with a reaction. That's so cool. I really like that. A very supportive cantrip. Forbidden Thought, 2 actions, somatic verbal, 30-foot range, targets a creature, will saving throw. Psychic Lock on a foe's mind that prevents it from a specific action. Choose strike, stride, or cast a spell or a specific action that you know the creature to have, such as breath weapon against a dragon. If the creature attempts that action on its next turn, it must surmount your lock to do so, causing it to take 1d6 mental damage plus spell casting ability modifier. The target's then immune to this effect for 1 minute. It heightened 1d6 additional damage. Empathetic, amped. If they fail the save, it's also stunned 1. Tight. Very tight. I like that's as powerful as I initially thought it was going to be reading it. The amp is more along the lines of what I thought it was going to be. I wonder if stunned 1, what does stunned do again? I just want to confirm. You can't act while stunned. So I'm assuming that stunned 1 obviously lasts for its turn. I'm assuming that means that they immediately become stunned and they cannot take the action that they were going to take. So amp is really what I would amp that as much as I possibly could if I was using Forbidden Thought, I think. Shatter Mind, 2 action, 15-foot cone. You telepathically assail the minds of your foes. AoE. 2d4 mental damage plus spellcasting modifier to all enemies. D4 damage increase. You can increase the spell to your choice of a 30-foot or a 60-foot cone. You get to choose because a 60-foot cone is probably going to include an ally or 2, so you might want to go smaller. Damage dice changes to D10s instead of D4s. Creatures that fail are stupefied 1 until the start of your next turn, or 2 on a critical failure. Nice. Contagious Idea, 2 actions, 30-foot, see text. Okay. 1 or 2 creatures other than yourself, see text. Nothing is so contagious as a thought. You place either a pleasant or terrifying thought in a creature's mind. You can then plant the same thought in a second creature's mind. You can't choose a creature that's already been the target of this casting of Contagious Idea, nor can you choose yourself. The second target can be beyond the range of the spell, but it must be within 30 feet of their first target. So on a pleasant thought, the target is soothed, gaining 5 temporary hit points that last for a minute, or terrifying thought, they have to attempt a will save. Critical success, unaffected. Success, they're frightened 1. Failed, frightened 2. Critical failed, frightened 3. When you heighten it, pleasant thought gets increased. Terrifying thought isn't as much. You can amp it. You can spread the thought from one target to a third target. The way they phrased this is really interesting, but obviously intentional. The fact that it's jumping from one mind to another, so like the range, and the way that it's framed is interesting, in that, like, okay, there's one creature within 30 feet of me, I'm going to put a terrifying thought into his. Then there's another creature beyond my 30-foot range of me, but it's within 30 range of him, and I'm jumping from my mind to his mind to their mind. So a little clunky in reading, but very cool, and I think the mechanics match the flavor, which is always my favorite thing in the world. Tangible Dream, is this our last one? Nope, 2 more. And then I'm gotta call it. This is gonna hit 2 hours. Tangible Dream, you pull colors and shapes from the depths of your mind, projecting impossible creations into the world as tapestries of astral thought, astral thread, or sculptures of force and light. This is our imagination one. Color Spray, Mirror Image, Sea of Thought, which is a new spell, Resilient Sphere, Etheric Shards, new spell, Blade Barrier, Project Image, Scintillating Pattern, Prismatic Sphere, very cool, on brand. Had to come up with cool new ones, but those will be cool, I am sure. I probably will not get to them in this video, so you're gonna have to pick up Dark Archive from Paizo or your local gaming store to check it out. A reminder, getting a book from Paizo.com. If you order the physical hardback book, you get immediate access to the PDF when it ships. Or is that only for subscriptions? That might just be for subscriptions, which is why you should have a subscription on Paizo.com for at least the rule books. They also have an additional subscription for all the Lost Omens? Is that what it's called? Yeah, Lost Omens, the world guides, like flavor text and stuff like that. Dancing lights can float wherever you like. Amped, you can flashing display that can potentially dazzle a target. Is that holy shit, dazzled is a condition. Your eyes are overstimulated. If vision is your only precise sense, all creatures and objects are concealed from you. That's pretty sweet. Amped dancing lights get a chance to dazzle opponents. Very cool. You can then shield spell can be deployed on behalf of others. When you cast shield, you can choose a target ally within 30 feet to gain the benefits of the spell instead of you. The option to shield block with the spell is up to you and uses your reaction, not the target. Your shield also gains the following amp. You create a layered barrier of 3 shields to improve your defenses. The duration increases to sustained up to 1 minute. The shield still lowers at the start of each of your turns, but you can raise it again when you sustain the spell. When you shield block with this spell, one of the 3 layers breaks, and you cease to gain the bonus to AC, but the spell doesn't end. You can keep using the spell until the final layer breaks. Once it does, the spell ends, and you can't cast shield or amped shield again for 10 minutes. You can choose to break the additional layers when you shield block with the spell to improve your defenses. If you break 2 layers instead of 1, increase the hardness to 1.5 times the normal amount. So 7 at first level, 15th at 3rd level, 22 at 5th, 37th at 9th. You break all 3 layers, increase the hardness to double the normal amount. Math, but cool. Imaginary weapon, simple weapon of force, melee attacking against your target's AC. If you hit, bludgeoning or dashing, it'll 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier. Critical success, deal double damage. So seems kind of like, you can choose to detonate your weapon to push the target away 10 feet from you. So it seems like an improved, what's the 5e spell? Spiritual weapon? Well, except imaginary weapon is just, it happens immediately. It isn't like you can't sustain it or anything like that. So not like that at all. Ignore me. Astral Rain, 2 actions. You fling a mass of furious thoughts into the air where they expand into numerous blades or other shapes that rain down. Any creature in the area, which is a 1 5-foot cube, or enters the area before the start of your next turn takes your choice of bludgeoning or piercing damage, 2d8 plus your spellcasting ability modifier. Changes from a 5 to a 5-foot burst if you amp it, and you can sustain the spell for up to a minute. Hologram Cage, 3 actions, 60-foot range, a cube 20 feet on each side. You weave light into a cube of vivid and fantastic patterns. The walls shed bright light for 10 feet, dim light for the next 20, and completely block line of sight. Creatures within the cage can't be seen by creatures outside of it, though they can see each other. Creatures outside of it can't see into it. You can dismiss the spell, and if you cast a spell again, previous hologram cage ends. If you amp it, the force walls make the cage's barriers physical as well as visual. Each 10 by 10 foot section of the cage's wall has a AC 10, hardness equal to double the spell's level, and HP equal to quadruple the spell's level. The spell is disrupted if any of its walls would pass through a creature when you cast it. Very cool. All right, last one, Unbound Step. The mind can flit from thought to thought. Why too shouldn't you? You focus on motion in a higher order of spatial dimensions, not just the typical 3, allowing for versatile abilities that alter positioning. Man, it's a good thing all these are subclasses that you'll just get access to all 3. This is basically a kind of... This reminds me of 5th edition's attempt at the... What was it called? My wife played it. It was Unearthed Arcana. I was a newbie DM and didn't know any better and let her play a mystic, UA mystic. And that shit was broken as fuck. Because it was basically all the different types of abilities that the conscious minds give you, except you could use all of them. You didn't pick one lane and then go down it. I could absolutely see 5e and Wizards of the Coast or a intelligent homebrewer stealing this concept and adapting it to a 5e class. Just take these flavors and these kind of types, what is your psychic special in, and just giving them special abilities based on it. So Thoughtful Gift at first level from the APG. Enlarge, Rally Point, which is new. Dimension Door, Strange Geometry, which is from the APG. Collective Transposition, Momentary Recovery, which is new. Maze and Bilocation, new. Phase Bolt and Warp Step, 2 brand new cantrips, and then your unique psy cantrip. So the Unbound Step psychic, its 3 psy cantrips are brand new. And I guess Phase Bolt and Warp Step become available. Can you learn I guess you can learn additional psy cantrips. There has to be a mechanic for that. So other psychics could learn it. Phase Bolt, your Phase Bolt temporarily sends the target's cover out of phase if it hits. On a success, reduce the target's circumstance bonus to AC, if any, by 1 until the beginning of your next turn. So if you amp it, your bolt leaves phase completely. I feel like Phase Bolt is missing. It seems like there's a description of Phase Bolt that is missing. I guess Phase Bolt, it's not meant to do any, because Amp Heighten says the bolt's damage increases by 2d4 instead of 1d4 when heightened and amped. But the amp description doesn't say anything about damage, but the description of the spell doesn't say it does 1d4 damage either. So I don't know if that's a layout thing. I'm just doing a quick Google to see. I mean, the book has been out. Unless I'm just really misunderstanding it. I'm not seeing anybody. Yeah, I don't think. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. If I'm reading it wrong, someone just tell me. It seems like my PDF is missing some information about Phase Bolt. You get a plus 10 foot status to your oh wait, okay, never mind. No, I'm good. So the descriptions for the cantrips are on page 106 and 107. These are just describing the differences that the cantrips do. Never mind. Okay, I'm crazy, and I've been staring at this for like an hour 45. My first probably just Zach moment. So if you commented telling me what was going on, go ahead and delete your comment. I have figured it out. All right, Distortion Lens, 1 action, 30 foot, 3 foot range, 1 foot square, 1 5 foot square. Magical lens that distorts space as best suits you. You create the lens in space in range, even suspended in air. Do your allies' ranged attack passes through the lens, it gains an additional 10 foot of range. And if enemies would pass through it, it gains an additional 10, requires an additional 10 foot of range to move through, though the enemy knows before using its ability whether the interference puts the target out of range. See, I would ignore that last little bit as a GM. Like, and most 95% of enemies are gonna have no idea what distortion lens does. It is a uncommon cantrip. So I feel like enemies would continue, like if they wouldn't normally, like maybe they would try to avoid it just because it's weird, but they're not gonna know that like, oh, my arrow is going to have the range it needs to get through it because it's going to add 10 additional feet. Like, it's not going to do that. Very cool. It's kind of like the shield one of the other ones got, where instead of increasing AC, it's increasing range. It was really cool. Ghostly Shift. Your body becomes insubstantial as you partially phase out, and you gain resistance 2 to all damage except force. When you amp it, you can pass through other creatures, causing painful effects, dealing damage to the people you pass through. Tesseract Tunnel, 2 actions, stand up to a minute. You race from point to point, tearing open a tunnel in space, creating a portal in your current space, and then stride, creating another portal in the space you end your stride. Until the beginning of your next turn, any creature that enters the first portal can immediately teleport itself to the exit portal as part of its move action, which adds the teleportation trait to the movement. You can only have 1 Tesseract Tunnel open at a time. Creating another causes the first to immediately close. You could use Tesseract Tunnel while burrowing, climbing, flying, or swimming instead of striding if you have the corresponding movement type. When you amp it, physical movement is no longer necessary to connect 2 points in space. You can cast Tesseract Tunnel. You simply create a tunnel that ends in a square within a range equal to your speed. You can choose to immediately teleport to the space at the far end of the tunnel. Furthermore, the tunnel can be traversed in both directions instead of only from the entrance to the exit. Finally, the spell duration changes to a minute. You can dismiss the spell. Amped Tesseract Tunnel is dope. Dope. Okay. Man, I've almost hit I haven't even gotten to the feats. I feel like the unconscious mind and subconscious mind shit is so cool. I would be happy with just that. There are more. I'll go through the first couple levels of feats or whatever. I don't even know if I'll have to, get time to do the other like the custom spells or the new spells rather. Okay. So looking at these feats, Ancestral Mind allows you to basically convert any inherent magic you got from a ancestry feat into a psychic spell and use your normal psychic spell casting for that. Obviously it plays into ancestries. I do not know the ancestries well enough to know which ones immediately could benefit from that, but basically any ancestry that provides you any ancestry feat that provides you a innate spell would benefit from taking Ancestral Mind, especially if you think it's something you're going to use a lot. Counter Thought as a reaction trigger when a creature casts a spell with a mental trait and you have an unexpended spell slot you could use to cast a spell with a mental trait. You can use your own mental magic to disrupt the enemy spell. So basically countering a mental spell. Mental Buffer, you gain resistance to mental damage equal to half your level. And increases to equal your level when your psyche is unleashed. Psychic Rapport, your telepathic sensitivity intensifies when you're affected by mental magic, making it easier for you to link to other creatures. After you cast a spell with a mental trait, until the start of your next turn, gain a +1 circumstance bonus to deception, diplomacy, and intimidation checks, and to perception checks to sense motive. All those are interesting. None of them immediately tie into a conscious mind choice, I feel like. Though Psychic Rapport is obviously going to be a bigger boon to the 2 unconscious mind characters that using the charisma stat instead of intelligence. Mental Buffer, mental damage is an interesting one. I mean, I guess it's on the table if Ancestral Mind doesn't benefit you at all. I guess your choice, if you took one of the intelligence unconscious minds, And in specific ancestries, your options are counter thought or mental buffer. Both seem fine, but no obvious one, which is fine because your class features at level 1 were bonkers. Second level, you can add 2 additional occult cantrips to your repertoire. At second level, you could add the 2 step brand new cantrips, which would be tight. Or mental bomb, releasing soothing mental waves. Use an amp instead of a psi cantrip's normal amp, and you can only use it on a cantrip that targets or affects you or one of your other allies. So this is definitely going to play in if you're playing one of the more supportive conscious minds. Psi burst, you can direct physical violent energies at a nearby creature. So basically giving you access to a low level 1 action damage might be helpful if you were taking one of those supportive conscious minds and didn't get a wanted to use your cantrip list for other things. More supportive magic just gives you a tiny little bit of damage. Warp space, use your mind to bend space, causing your spell to strike from a strange vector. Use this amp in place of a normal entry. You can choose a square within 30 feet that you have line of sight and effect on. You can then determine your spell's line of effect and line of sight from there, as well as whether creatures have cover against the spell. So basically, warp space, I would probably take that with the character I've got in my head, would let you basically cast a spell from like up here and hit down from cover so that you could ignore cover AC bonuses. Tight. You can astral tether to one of your allies. If you gain a benefit from a psychic amp, you can have the amp affect the tethered creature instead. Tight. Homing beacon. You can place a beacon in the target's mind that announces its presence to those nearby. Use that play. This is a alternate amp. It emits the creature's location, making it easier to notice the creature for a minute. If it was invisible, it's merely concealed. If it was concealed, it's no longer concealed. Psi strikes as a free action, and your most recent action was to cast a spell or to unleash your psyche. You can siphon residual psychic energies from your spell into a weapon you're wielding, or one of your unarmed attacks. The attack deals an extra 1d6 force damage until the end of your current turn. Whoa! Psi strikes at level 4 immediately gives you the option of potentially like not really legitimately, but at least a way more viable option to have to actually make strikes. Because you could absolutely two action cast a spell, free action, psi strike, roll a melee attack, deal some extra force damage. And then third action, stride. Thought form summoning, you can create a prototypical creature from the depths of your imagination instead of calling one from elsewhere. Whenever you summon a creature, you can choose to instead create a psychic construct of that creature. This grants it resistance to physical damage equal to half its level, weakness 5 to force and mental damage, and the ability to pass through enemy spaces without needing to tumble through. I didn't even think about, especially if you're playing an imagination Fae-esque, and picked your additional spells to kind of focus on summoning. Thought form summoning would be really cool. Violent Unleash at level 4 as a free action. You can unleash your psyche. You can deal 2d6 force damage to all creatures in a 20-foot emanation. This explosion is taxing, making you stunned 1. So this would effectively probably be the last thing you do do the last thing that you do when you are ending your the last thing you do before your Unleash Psyche effects end. Cool. All right, 5th level. No, that was it. I think we'll call it there. Let's scroll up and look at maybe some of the last bits. Just for funsies, as a free action, and you just recently cast a spell. And you unleash your psyche, you can teleport 15 feet for funsies. All in your head. You refuse to believe that things happening to you are existing. Nothing can affect you if you don't believe it. Attempt a will save against a triggering effect instead of a reflex or fortitude save, which you should be an expert in by this point, or a legendary, potentially. You don't gain the effect. So you can basically just choose to replace a reflex or fortitude save with a will save, which you should be legendary in. Tight. Cranial detonation. Once per round, and you just successfully reduced one or more non-mindless enemies to 0 hit points with a spell. You explode their head. Each enemy you reduce to 0 hit points dies, and its head explodes, generating a shockwave and a 15-foot emanation around that enemy. Each creature in any of the emanations takes 10d6 bludgeoning damage with a basic reflex save. If this damage reduces an enemy to 0 hit points, its head also explodes, potentially damaging more creatures and potentially damaging more detonations. A given creature can take damage only once from a single use of cranial detonation. Well, if that isn't the most anime dopest shit I've ever seen, I don't know what to tell you. At level 18, you can also take a feat to refocus all 3 focus points instead of the 2, and it even kind of gets around you potentially like multi-classing. 20th level, become thought. You shed some of your material form, becoming a being of pure thought. You gain resistance 10 to physical damage, but weakness 5 to mental damage, and weakness 10 to any effect that deals damage by targeting the spirit, such as Spirit Blast. You can change your appearance on a whim. This takes a single action, which has the concentrate trait, has the effects of illusory disguise, and lasts until you change your appearance again. Once per year, when you die, you automatically return to life the next day, as long as one living sentient creature on your plane remembers you. The memories enable you to reconstruct yourself from their thoughts. You appear in the vicinity of the creature that remembers you most strongly. Mind over matter. You get an additional 10th level spell slot. Twin Psyche. You've segmented your Psyche so it can operate in tandem. When you unleash your Psyche, double its duration. Unlimited potential. 1 action. You can do it once per minute. The laws of magic can limit your mind only if you think you need them, and you've grown past the need for such limits. If your next action is to cast a spell of 5th level or lower that has no duration, you don't expend the prepared spell as you cast it. Free spells. Free 5th level or lower spells at level 20.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. At level 20, who needs rules? You've grown past the need for the physical world.
Become Thought's going to be hard to not take, though, right? Become Thought is wild. Unlimited potential is also wild. Twin Psyche is a level. I don't feel like Twin Psyche at level 20 matches the power of those other 2. Now, if there's there might be a earlier feat that I skipped that reduces the negative effects of unleashing your Psyche. That would be where I kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Like if unleashing your Psyche no longer stupefies you, now that would be something to think about. All right, got to wrap this up because I just hit the 2-hour mark. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 on the Psychic. Easily what I would want my next character to be. Absolutely be on the lookout for when Archives of Nethys, Path Builder, Wanderer's Guide, whoever adds this to their character builder, because you should play around with this. It is buck wild, very, very cool. Love it a ton. I didn't even get into the brand new spells. I'm sure they're dope as shit too. It doesn't even really matter that much because everything that I just read was incredible, off the charts awesome. The Thaumaturge is going to have a lot to live up to compare, but I think I have, I'm going to have to try to keep the bar low for the Thaumaturge because the Psychic was just that awesome, but not OP in a way that makes me feel like, well, if you're not choosing to be a Psychic, you're not going to be as good as a Psychic. Like, the Psychic is good at very specific things that fit a flavor and a play type that I like a lot. Personal 10 out of 10. Crying, screaming, jumping up and down, weeping, can't believe it. Best it's ever been. Illegal, outrageous, offensive, incredible. Loved that. Do you have your own thoughts? Do you disagree with me? Did I miss anything incredibly egregious that I did not correct myself later in the video? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you liked this video and you like the psychic, like the video. Hit the little thumbs up button underneath the video. If you're excited to see me react in a potentially similar way to the Thaumaturge, also from Dark Archive, hit the subscribe button. That video will probably be coming to you a few days, a week or so after this. At that point, Dark Archive's street date should have hit. So make sure that you've ordered your PDF or your hardback from Paizo.com or from your local game store. Support local businesses, especially our local game stores. They'd be happy to put in an order for you if they do not have Dark Archive immediately available on the shelves when its street date hits, which I believe is the 27th. Incredible, amazing, loved this. Hope you did too. Thanks for watching. Peace. See you next one.